Welcome to the Private Practice Startup Podcast, where we help ambitious private practitioners across the globe to brand themselves and grow their dream practices. We chat with successful private practitioners, business coaches, and marketing experts, bringing you tons of practice building ninja tips. Visit privatepracticestartup.com for awesome resources, attorney-approved private practice paperwork, and our signature marketing e-course. Here are your co-hosts, Dr. Kate Campbell and Katie Lemieux.
Hey there, Startup Nation. Welcome back to another episode of the Private Practice Startup Podcast. We hope that you guys are doing great today, wherever you may be. If you are new to our podcast, we want to say welcome to the Startup Nation family. And for that, we have a gift for you. We want you to head on over to privatepracticestartup.com, slide on over to the resources tab, and especially since we're going to be talking about this stuff today on today's topic, which is all about paperwork, specifically notes, we would love for you to take advantage of our attorney-approved customizable HIPAA form. Like it or not, we got to do paperwork, and this is actually the topic that you guys wanted to talk about today. So before I introduce the show, or before I introduce our guest and the topic, we hope that you guys joined us last time as we spoke with Jared Bolin from Hushmail, and we talked about tips to transition to telehealth successfully. So we dove into different areas, I guess I should say, on that podcast, kind of talking about security, pricing, other interesting things that we may have not considered before. So go ahead and check that out as well. Today's guest is Elizabeth Arias, and we are going to be talking about 5 tricks for managing progress notes effectively and not getting too far behind. And of course, you guys were the one that said, I want to know about this topic because it is the bane of most therapists' existence, progress notes. A little bit about Elizabeth. She goes by Beth. Beth is the president and founder of Clearly Clinical. If you haven't checked it out before, I definitely recommend you do. An affordable national podcast-based continuing ed company that highlights women and minority clinicians. Called the Utilization Review Guru, Beth trains clinical teams across the country about clinical documentation, utilization review, and law and ethics. She's one of few people who believes documentation trainings can be fun. She also operates a private practice north of Los Angeles where she works with young adults and members of the LGBTQIA population. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you. It's wonderful to talk with both of you. Thank you for the opportunity.
And we are glad you're here. And it's interesting, like as I read your bio and you talk about like how documentation trainings can be fun, Kay and I like totally reframe documentation and we talk about it's just part of the conversation. And it really helps, set you and your clients up for success, and utilizing that and having clear boundaries and having clear conversations actually creates better client care. So I'm excited for you to share a lot about your tips and tricks for progress notes. So I guess we always like to kind of like get started with a story, right? Like how did you get so crazy about documentation? It's so important.
I've just always been really excited about it. No, not at all. I actually started before I went to therapy school, if you will. I started in medical, and so I was doing utilization review for a surgeon, and so I started to understand the importance of documentation that way, and then went to therapy school. And in my first internship, it was one of those where like you show up, they give you the keys, and then they like push you out of the office and say good luck. And it was it wasn't state run, but it was state funded. And so it was really rigorous clinical documentation that I had never really encountered before. And in the first, we'll say 8 or 10 weeks, you might have been able to find me hiding under my desk, rocking back and forth because of how stressed out I was. I mean, just incredibly high caseload, working with a really high acuity population. And then these incredible 11-page assessments that were due within 48 hours, these just very rigorous clinical documentation requirements. So for me, it was the recognition, like, I can't live this way. I can't survive this way. I'm not enjoying my life. I'm not enjoying my career. And I'm so stressed out as a clinician, primarily because of the documentation, that I'm not serving my clients well. So for me, all of this that I've created in the last decade has really been in response to that experience and looking into what actually has to be in our documentation. How do we write it effectively and efficiently? And then, like you said, how do we reframe our relationship with documentation so that it's not the bane of our existence, because it really does contribute to better quality care. That's why we have some of the requirements like treatment planning, but it feels like this thing we have to do at the end of the day or at the end of the week or at the end of the month or at the end of the year. I see you. Because we don't like it. And I'm just going to say right now, like, I don't like documentation either. I have yet to meet anybody that says like, oh, that's my favorite part of my job. Like, no, none of us like it. But so what I train from and teach from is my own experience. Like, how do I make this easier so that I'm not just hating my career because of documentation? So that's how all of this came to be.
Nice. And did you have anyone kind of like teach you, show you the ropes? Because I don't remember that for myself.
No, I totally didn't. It was, I mean, I worked so I'm in Southern California, and this was a Department of Mental Health contracted facility. So you have quote unquote DMH trainings that are really rigorous. But I had that maybe after I'd been at the internship for a year. So I had already been there for a long time. For me, it was a matter of doing a lot of reading and a lot of research, talking to attorneys that I knew in passing, and putting together my own version of standard of care. Hundreds of dollars spent on Amazon and things like that to try to collaborate and put together these materials to have it all make sense.
Nice. So when people are struggling with like getting documentation done, like what is like one of the first things that you talk about or recommend?
So we've all gotten behind, and we all know that stress, you fall asleep at night. And I think all of us know that we are in an inherently, relatively risky position, because when our documentation is overdue, we have increased liability risk. So today I want to talk about 5 things that people can do to reconceptualize their relationship to documentation. And the first one is to think of documentation as a summary, not a play-by-play. I totally did the thing where like my notes would read like a script, like a movie script, where it was like, he said, therapist said, parent said, therapist said, and it told the entire story. But really our clinical documentation is just basically cliff notes. For those of you that are, I guess, old enough to know what cliff notes are. Those cliff notes were the summarized version of a book so that you could pass that paper you needed to write for Old Man in the Sea. Not that I've done that or anything. And I'm not speaking from experience.
Your friend told you.
Yeah. Just asking for a friend. And when we're talking about our progress notes, what I find, as an auditor, a lot of times people will write down unnecessary details, and I love it. Like, I love that it's thorough, but if you're auditing records, what you're trying to pull out is the most critical information. And one of the things that I use for that, I created a mnemonic called Safety First that helps people recognize what actually needs to be in their clinical documentation. And it's not like a note format. It's not like SOAP where it's subjective, objective, assessment plan. Safety First, and I'll explain quickly what that mnemonic is. And you can, please, to the listeners, you're welcome to email me for a copy of it. I have a PDF that I'm happy to send to you. But Safety First and foremost, our documentation needs to have safety. And then first, and again, you can get this in writing. So if you're listening and don't have a pen, it's fine. F stands for functional impairment, I for interventions, R for response, S for symptoms, and then T for therapeutic interpretation. So Safety First is like, those are the most important components that need to be in your clinical documentation. And what I find is that people will write like everything that happened, or they'll describe that the client's hair was in a high ponytail. That's great. You're great. You're a prolific writer, but as an auditor, I don't need to know that information unless it's clinically relevant. So helping people just focus on the summary and summarizing that, summarizing the safety issues, summarizing the functional impairment. What are the interventions? What was your response or the client's response? What are the symptoms? And then what's your therapeutic interpretation of all of that? So first and foremost, think of this as a summary.
Nice. I like that Safety First thing. That's a great, that's cool. I'm just like still digesting it as you went through it so fast. Like, okay. Awesome.
Yeah. And I honestly, like, I have, on our podcast, on the Clearly Clinical podcast, I have a whole 1-hour podcast there that covers Safety First more in detail and talks more about what really needs to be in your progress notes. But for the purposes of today, like, how do we look at it as a matter of efficiency? Thinking about those just most critical pieces of information and just summarizing them, and that your progress note really should be a couple of sentences describing what you did and the client did, a couple of sentences describing the therapeutic interpretation. And Actually, I shouldn't say couple, I should say a few. It should be at least 3, but to just really focus on summarizing. And then go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Beth, we'd love to put the link to that episode where you do a deep dive into safety first
Absolutely.
in the show notes. So if you would send that to us, we'll include that for all of the listeners who really want to do that deep dive.
Absolutely. And actually, I can send you the link as well for the Safety First PDF, so you can just embed that and have that
awesome.
for listeners. So
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, fantastic. So before we move on to number 2, let's just take a quick moment for our sponsor. You didn't become a therapist to reconcile your expenses or figure out tax deductions. Herd Bookkeeping and Tax guide your private practice with affordable bookkeeping, one-on-one expert help, and tax support so you can get back to seeing clients. This means no more fiddling around in spreadsheets, overpaying accountants, or guessing your quarterly tax payments. Herd is the only financial platform designed exclusively for you, mental health professionals. Just ask Melanie Evans, a clinical social worker from New York. She says, it's great to have an expert to turn to whenever I have a question related to accounting. Knowing that my bookkeeping and taxes are in good hands, I can really focus on the more clinical parts of my work. Thanks, Melanie. Most accountants serve a variety of businesses and are too expensive for your practice. That should not stop you from accessing the information you need to be successful as a business owner. Whether this is your first year in practice or you're an experienced clinician, Herd Bookkeeping and Tax helps you manage your practice finances with ease at a price you can afford. Make this year that year that you take charge of your practice finances. Visit www.joinherd.com. That's join herd, HEARD.com, and schedule a consultation and receive a free month of financials to see how our services can help your practice thrive. No credit card or contract required. Visit joinherd.com. Okay, guys, it's sponsor time. You know what? Instead of reading a script about Gusto's payroll and benefits, we wanted to tell you what small business owners say, the people who use Gusto every day. Here's what one small business owner says. With Gusto, I think of payroll as a 30-second job. The website is so friendly and a joy to use. Friendly payroll? You don't hear that every day. And how about Amy from Utah? Amy says, I love Gusto so much. It's so painless. It's like going to the spa, and we have great options and rates even though we're a super small team. Like going to the spa? Wow. And here's what Amneet says about Gusto's support team. Whenever something comes up, I reach out and literally 24 hours later, they tell us what to do or assure us that we've already handled it. Smart technology and friendly humans, that's super cool. Honestly, the list goes on, and right now our listeners get 3 months free when they go to gusto.com/PPS. Yep, 3 months of payroll, benefits, administration, and more, totally free. Again, that's gusto.com/PPS. All right, so we got summarize. You talked about safety first. What would you say would be next?
Next is what I call case conference logic. So really, I mean, think about those days when we can actually see people, like sit down in a room with people. We'll get back to those days someday. But if you're at a case conference and you're seeking consultation about something, you need to think about your progress notes. What would you say in a case conference, a case consult? And if you wouldn't say it in a case consult, then you don't need to write it. So for example, one thing I see in progress notes is like therapist established warmth and rapport. You probably wouldn't say that in a consult. You wouldn't say, okay, well, the client came to me, client is 32, identifies as female, whatever. And then be like, and then I work to establish warmth and rapport. You would say, I've done dialectical behavior therapy. We did weighing pros and cons of getting a new job. And you would talk about the nitty gritty interventions that you've done. So when you're thinking about what you'd say in your progress note, if you wouldn't say it in a case conference where you have like that little 30 or 45 second blurb to fill other people in before you ask your question, then you probably don't need to say it in your progress note.
It's funny as you're saying that, I'm kind of like laughing to myself because Kate and I have done supervision for many years, supervised interns and stuff like that. And their desire to talk so much about the nitty gritty is actually, so if I guess I would say as like your 30-second, commercial for your client, like these are the main points that I need to convey to you for you to be able to conceptualize this.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just those main points. Again, going back to a summary, not a play-by-play.
Just like the difference between process and content. So many people get lost in the content, and it's so overwhelming because there is so much of that, but attending to the process.
Yeah, that you're really just pulling out those most important points. And the third point that I want to make for helping people become more effective and efficient, I really like dictation software. So I have a Mac, I'm an Apple user, and I know that if I think it's like the function 2 key, if I hit that twice, it's going to pull up for dictation. That can be really efficient, as can concurrent documentation. So concurrent documentation is when you're actually writing the note with a client in the room. And I know that listeners are going to be like, what? Like, why would I involve my client in that? They shouldn't be paying for that. But when we think of our clinical documentation as something that is living and breathing and really part of the therapeutic process, it's not weird to say to the client at the end of the session. So today we did the dialectical behavior therapy Dear Man activity and having that conversation with your dad. We also did some deep breathing and grounding skills, and I'm trying to think of a third intervention. And we also identified like 3 self-care activities you can do this weekend, when you're feeling stressed at home with the kiddos. So that's pretty much the interventions part of your progress note. And then you involved a client in that, because it's also helpful for a client to be like, oh, we did something. We didn't just sit here and chatty chat. Like, we actually did something, and they become more involved and invested. So I like concurrent documentation. It takes practice to sit there with your computer or with your notes and like write with the client. And for some people, it may not work. Like, if you have something that works for you and you're not required to do concurrent, then don't, but it's an option to you. And there are also like training specifically about concurrent documentation. And going back to dictation, one thing, this is me, I like to talk, which you may have gathered. My thing with dictation is like, that also takes practice, because if you're dictating, sometimes we start talking too much and you give all this detail and you're like, oh yeah, I was just supposed to be talking about the interventions. So keep that in mind. But dictation is another way that you may save time. I mean, in the days that I was going into the office and was actually seeing clients in person, sometimes I would dictate on my drive home. That, I'm driving home alone and I'm hitting lots of stoplights and I have an app on my phone and I can dictate. So yes, I need to go back and I need to check it and make sure that it's accurate and it doesn't pick up, Alanis Morissette in the background. Not because Alanis Morissette is in my car listening to music is what I'm saying. But I mean, hey, it could happen. But so making sure that you're utilizing things to make your process more efficient, like dictation and concurrent documentation.
Beth, you're funny. It's funny because we didn't experience, you were the host before and we were the guest, but I'm just really enjoying you. I just need to say that.
Well, I enjoy both of you too.
So I just wanted to comment on like what you're talking about. And I love that. And, I, for many years led teams and managed groups and things like that. And the concurrent documentation. So like, you're a business owner if you're listening to this podcast, right? And you've done many things that don't make you feel comfortable and continue on doing that. This is one of the areas that I would encourage you to try if you have not tried. Like, if you really have, like, if you're one of those people like Beth keeps talking about, like a week, a month, oh God, I don't want to say a year, you have stuff piling up, making it, it's all how you frame it, right? Like, hey, and you can even say to your clients, like, hey, I'm trying something new and I'd like to do this with you because I feel that this will actually help us and our work together. Just like when a client gives you like a whole bunch of stuff, just like you would summarize, like, okay, well, let me pull out the important points about what you had shared. So I'm hearing this, I'm hearing this, I'm hearing that. Is that correct? That's the same thing like at the end when you're doing the progress note. And a lot of times they may have forgotten something that you've done and be like, oh yeah, right. And then you can encourage them to write it down or whatever, like you're creating this together. I've trained people to do like letters for like a court together. So there's no surprises to your client about what in the world is going to be in there. And the great thing is it's not, and if you do take insurance and you can't bill for things like that, like you're utilizing that time and you're getting paid to do it. So
exactly.
I think it's so important. And it's just good client care.
Yeah. So it can be done. And I know the first time I did it, it felt really scary, but now I do it every single time. And I'm a trainer in feedback informed treatment by Duncan and Miller. And that method also really encourages collaborative care. And that's what the research has shown. So I think there's a way to actually lean into this in a way that doesn't just save us time for documentation, but it also improves the quality of care because the clients are feeling held and they understand what we're doing. Because again, studies have shown that when clients know what's being done in therapy and why it's being done, the outcomes go up. So all of this is actually really research-based, believe it or not. And to move to number 4, the next thing, self-motivate and self-reward. So one of the things with that is like, I remember one for me. There was this little coin purse that I really wanted. And until I had gotten all of these things done and these, I was in an environment where I was doing quarterly reviews of treatment plans and things like that. And they were really rigorous because when I started the job, I had a lot of clients that I ended up with. So pretty much every 3 months would have these really rigorous case reviews that were really stressful. And so for me, it was like, I can't get that cute little coin purse until I have completed this thing. And really, I was working toward it and giving myself little rewards. Yeah, you can punish, but well, technically, if we want to be really effective, we can punish and we can reward for profound behavior change. But if we're looking at rewards, I think it's important to self-motivate. And it's like, hey, if I can get this done, then I get that Frappuccino that I've really been having a hankering for, or I can use that fancy bath bomb that a friend gave me and take a nice bath, or whatever it is, to help motivate us to get it done. Because I think when we're in private practice and there's nobody looking over our shoulder, there's nobody checking us and saying, here's what you need to be doing, you start to feel like you're kind of floating around in an ocean without a buoy. And then we need to create our own buoys and create our own accountability. And I think it helps to reward yourself, or to even say to a friend, I could say to both of you right now, I have these treatment plans that I haven't done yet. And I also need to do a discharge plan. I have a summary. I have a summary for a client that I need to send. And I commit to you right now, both to you, Kate and Katie, I'm going to work on this and I will get it done by the end of the day. So doing these things to kind of really identify, I'm a big fan also of writing things down, make your little checkbox list so that you can say, yes, that's done. And we get a little pat on our backs. So instead of do all the progress notes, it's write down the progress notes from this week or for this client. And then you can check it off and have that sense of accomplishment to keep you moving forward. Because sometimes, I think everybody has been under so much stress recently. And by recently, I mean, apparently all of 2020. So we need to find balance and motivation and take things in little chunks because it's really easy to get overwhelmed.
Absolutely. I love those ideas that you share, because I know for myself, I work really well off of a reward-based system, and being able to think about something that would be really a great self-care modality, like going and getting a massage, or maybe there's a pair of shoes or some retail therapy aspect or item or experience that I want to have, and being able to knock off those things off my to-do list. And when I finally accomplish them all, giving myself that reward, it really works. It's like tricking yourself. And sometimes when you're in private practice, you are, a lot of times you are just isolated, and you could technically get away with it for a period of time. Not that I'm saying to recommend that at all. And for me, I hate procrastinating. I always would make sure that I got my notes done that day, because it would be too overwhelming for me if it builds up. I just can't function that way. But I knew nobody was really looking over my shoulder unless they, my charge got subpoenaed, or insurance companies or anything like that. But yeah, you don't want to get overwhelmed and behind. So having those ways to trick yourself and play those mental mind games to make yourself get it done is so helpful.
There are so many ways to keep your practice organized, but Therapy Notes is by far the best. Their easy to use, secure platform lets you not only do billing, scheduling, and progress notes, but also create a client portal to share documents and request signatures. Plus, they offer amazing unlimited phone support. So when you have a question, they're there so you can get help fast. Get started with Therapy Notes today, trusted by over 60,000 professionals. Go to therapynotes.com and enter promo code PPS, as in Private Practice Startup, and you'll get 2 months for free. Also, you can listen to episode 54, where we interviewed Brad Pleiner and took an in-depth view into their EHR.
And Kate, one of the things that you mentioned, I was going to kind of jump in there about that, is like creating a habit or rule. My rule was like, I don't leave the office until my notes are done.
Exactly.
Period. The end. Because also too, I can't imagine then coming in the next day, seeing another 4 to 5 clients, and now I have 10 notes to write. Like, I'm not the crisp, fresh person of remembering what had occurred. And I would kind of do a mixture of the concurrent documentation. I'd fill out part of the progress note or whatever. And then for me, it was a little bit more of like thinking about the interventions more clearly, and then writing it clinical. Because sometimes we'd want to just be like, I asked the client this and they're doing what, and you're like, that's what is the clinical thing that I'm doing? You know what I mean? One thing that I'd like to add in is I had done this with one of my interns, is gamify your note writing. So you're talking about accountability, right? So she was working in a treatment center at the time, having difficulty getting notes done. So she engaged a colleague, so creating accountability, and they set a timer, and whoever won, wrote their notes in the least amount of times, the other person would have to pay for lunch. So reward, gamification, and accountability. So that is kind of fun for sure.
I love that.
That's a great idea. I think it's a wonderful way to look at it, and to just to learn to self-manage, because so many of us come from a team-based environment where we're used to somebody saying every week at a meeting, okay, you're 6 progress notes behind, and being used to the fact that in private practice, no one's taking the fall for it except for us and for our clients. So when we get behind, and I know I joke about being a year late, it's no joke. Like, it's the liability risk to even a few days sitting between you seeing a client and actually writing the note. It's every hour and day that passes is increasing your risk as a clinician, that something could go sideways and you could be held accountable to it. So it's very real, but keeping in mind, like, okay, then we need to do this, and we need to figure out ways to motivate. And my last point, this is just, especially for people who, well, I guess you could do it either way, but for people who work with insurance, no money, or no note, no money. So don't let yourself bill for a session until the note is in there. And the danger that I've seen is when clinicians sometimes bill before a note is in there, and they haven't locked it in and saved it and signed it, they may forget about it, and then they've technically just committed fraud. So being really mindful. And if you don't accept insurance, or if you have, part private pay and you're working with insurance or checks or whatever it is, like for me, I won't cash the check. And I often I won't run the credit card until I know that note is in there and I have done basically everything that I need to do to get paid. And so I think of it as like my boss is requiring that, in order to get paid for XYZ project, I need to do these things and I need to check off these boxes. And in order for me to get paid and self-manage as my own boss, I need to do this. So my rule is like no note, no money. And that will absolutely motivate you if you're able to hold yourself to that requirement. And again, things are going to happen. There are going to be medical emergencies and client emergencies and things like that. But as a norm, to set the expectation that this is part of that 50-minute session or that 80-minute session or whatever you're doing, and thinking of it as you said at the very beginning, Katie, like this idea of bringing it all together and making it just the business of practice, if you will, of what it means to be a clinician, and that this is one of our requirements as part of delivering therapy.
Nice. Well, I love all these tips and tricks and things like that. And, for those of you listening, first off, share this podcast with a colleague because they need it. I'm just certain of it. A, they will thank you. And B, I'd really encourage you to try out one of the things that Elizabeth mentioned today, or Beth mentioned, because I think that's really important, because, notes and paperwork are a pain in the butt. And we really want to help you kind of win back your time, feel better about this, because I know that you guys really love doing the work that you love doing, and that's being with your clients. So this is a way to help you do that. Beth, what do you want people to take away from your message today?
Well, just to summarize, so those 5, it's a summary, not a play-by-play. Number 2, use your case conference logic. Number 3, dictation and concurrent documentation can help you. Number 4, to self-motivate. And number 5, no note, no money. But really the takeaway, like there's a lot of training that we need to do in clinical documentation, because many of us received very little or no training really on it. So dive in. Please, like I said, please visit our podcast. It's Clearly Clinical, Light Up the Couch. You can search any of those words and it'll come up for you on any podcast platform. I have the first 6 there about documentation, but we've had your beautiful hosts here talking about telehealth and law and ethics, and we have all these things really pertaining to the business of practice. So I encourage people to just continue learning. And also they're great resources on Amazon, great books out there that can help you with interventions. But so the takeaway is, like, if you're suffering, if this is hard for you to get behind, believe me, it's everyone. It's not just you. And it's a matter of learning a rhythm that's going to work for you and for your practice, and that it will get better. It will get better. There's just a learning curve.
This is such a helpful episode, Beth. Thank you so much for coming on and breaking it down this way and helping people to see it from that different perspective and the specific steps that you offer. And I just want to say, you guys, if you haven't listened to Beth's podcast at Clearly Clinical, definitely check it out. It's one of the ones that I follow closely, and she does an amazing job with the content that she provides. And it's just a great resource. So definitely check that out.
And one thing that I wanted to share, it's not just about like therapists, is you guys have a really strong mission. So I'd really like for you to share about that, Beth.
Yes. So we donate to the Trevor Project for LGBTQIA youth suicide prevention. And then I, as a trainer and as a presenter, often found that the majority of the people I was presenting with were not often representative of the field. So that, I wanted a place for women and for minorities to have a space where they could present and bring their information to the forefront. We launched in 2018, and we've now, we've worked with hundreds of different presenters and interviewees, and it's an incredible thing to be a part of. I get such a kick out of it, and I've met the neatest people, including you two. And so I encourage listeners. We talk about everything from HIPAA to race relations to all different kinds of new age therapies and adjunct modalities. So it's really cool. I love it. Mm-hmm. And I want to let folks know, please go to our website. It's clearlyclinical.com and sign up for our newsletter. If you sign up for that, we send out free continuing ed courses all the time that are podcast based. They're interviews. They're cool and fast paced, and they're really informative with experts. So please make sure to do that. And I also want to let folks know, because of the collaboration on this episode, we're going to be creating a 10% off discount for your listeners. They can use the code Kate and Katie to get an additional 10% off 1 year of continuing ed with us. It's all podcast. So our standard price is $60 for a year. We are literally the least expensive unlimited CE company in the country. But we want to motivate people to get good continuing ed and to feel like they're continuing to move forward and learn in their work. So again, if you want 10% off and say an additional $6, so it's $54, you can use the code Kate and Katie to visit us for unlimited continuing ed for a year for that price. So thank you both for your kind of support of this mission of our platform.
Of course. I love it. Thank you so much, Beth, for being with us today. And we hope that you guys join us next week as we invite one of our faves and probably one of your faves, Tiffany McLean, back. And we are going to be talking about race, money, and worth. So join us for that podcast.
All right. Well, we hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We're always trying to create content that meets your needs. I'm getting tongue-tied a little bit for some reason. We're always trying to create content that meets your needs. So if there's a topic that you haven't heard yet that you'd love to hear, definitely let us know. If there's something that you're loving about the podcast, let us know that too. We love to hear from you. And if you look at our show notes page, that's where you'll be able to subscribe, rate, and review the show. And of course, share with your fellow friends and colleagues. We hope you stay inspired, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thanks again, Beth, for being here.
My pleasure.
Take care, Startup Nation. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us on The Private Practice Startup. Visit theprivatepracticestartup.com for awesome resources, free trainings, attorney-approved private practice paperwork, and so much more.